Sometimes life throws these moments at you that feel unreal, like something out of a movie, but it's happening right in front of you, and all you can do is hold your breath and watch. This is one of those moments. Grace Miller was just a quiet waitress in a little diner on Willow Street, nothing fancy. Just chipped linoleum floors, worn-out red booths, and that bell over the door that jingled every time someone walked in. She'd been working there 6 days a week since her husband, Major Daniel Carter, went missing overseas. 5 years ago, officially presumed dead, no funeral, no closure, just silence. Grace was the kind of person people barely noticed. Chestnut hair always pulled back, eyes tired but kind, hands that wiped tables gently but with purpose. To the regulars, she was Grace, polite, quick with a refill, always there, always steady. But beneath that calm was a storm. She carried the weight of loss every day, invisible, heavy, yet she showed up, poured coffee, carried memories no one dared ask about. Her mornings were ritual, unlocking the door before dawn, brewing the first pot, prepping counters, humming softly as the sky lightened from gray to gold. The staff learned not to pry. They knew Daniel was a soldier, that he never came home. While others swapped weekend stories, Grace folded napkins perfectly, polished silverware till it gleamed, and took a quiet moment with her coffee before the day's noise swallowed her whole. Some locals had heard whispers a war hero lost in action, but over time, memories faded and new faces came in, oblivious to her silent vigil. Grace didn't mind. She wasn't waiting for pity or questions. Closure was a stranger she didn't expect to meet. She just wanted peace. Yet sometimes, in the quiet lull between breakfast rushes, an ache would creep in a hollow that made her glance at the door, hoping, just hoping. Tucked deep in her apron pocket was a photo, edges creased from years of being held. A snapshot of a moment before everything changed. Daniel in full dress uniform, eyes sharp, smile proud. Grace in a simple blue dress, holding his hand like they could hold the world. That photo wasn't about pain, it was a tether, a reminder of the love that had once anchored her. No one in the diner had ever seen it. It was her secret heartbeat. She'd never taken off her wedding band, some noticed, but no one asked why. To them, she was a widow still holding onto a ghost. But Grace wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not yet. That morning, the bell jingled again. Another customer. Grace didn't look up, busy scrubbing a syrup-sticky table near the window. But behind her, whispers floated, 2 men murmuring by the counter. "You know she's still waiting for him," one said. "Major Carter?" They said he died in Kabul. Grace's spine stiffened, but she kept her face calm. She'd heard it all before. People spoke as if she wasn't there, as if waiting for someone lost was a weakness, a fantasy. Officially, Daniel was missing in action. Unofficially, the world had moved on. Grace wondered if maybe she should, too, but how do you bury someone who never came home? She finished wiping the table and slipped to the back, behind the kitchen door, taking a slow breath, steadying trembling hands. She hadn't heard Daniel's name in a while. Didn't expect it today until exactly 9:37 a.m., when the bell jingled once more. Grace was pouring coffee for an old man near the jukebox when something shifted in the air, a hush rolling over the diner like a wave. Conversations quieted. Chairs stopped creaking. She turned, and there he was. A tall man in full military dress, blue uniform gleaming in the sunlight, streaming through the windows. Metals catching the light, hat tucked under one arm, boots echoing softly as he stepped forward. He wasn't young anymore, but there was still strength, pride, something unbroken in his stance. Grace's heart skipped a beat. Soldiers came through that door all the time, recruiters, veterans, travelers, but this felt different. The man's eyes scanned the room until they locked on her. And then he walked not to a table, not to the counter, straight toward her. Her breath caught. Tray in hand, mind racing, she froze. It was personal, familiar. Those deep brown eyes that once smiled across deserts now held something heavier, but still warm. Her fingers trembled. For a moment, the world narrowed. It wasn't possible. Not after all these years. She blinked once. Twice. The soldier didn't say a word. just looked at her, lips parted as if to speak, but held back. It was like time melted away, no uniforms, no war, just Grace and Daniel under a sky full of dreams. Her heart pounded so loud, she thought the whole diner could hear it. Then a slow tear traced down her cheek. She whispered a name she thought she'd never say aloud again. Daniel. He nodded once, eyes glassy. It's me, Gracie. Tom didn't stop at shattered. Grace staggered backward, hand over her mouth, tray slipping and crashing to the floor. Silence swallowed the room, coffee cups frozen halfway to lips, forks paused midair. Even the jukebox's soft hum faded away. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Why is the lady crying?" he asked. No one answered. Everyone watched. Grace watched. Daniel watched. Two souls reunited after a lifetime apart, speaking without words. Then, in a moment no one expected, Daniel saluted her, a slow, solemn gesture that echoed through the stunned stillness like thunder. Grace blinked through tears. The room remained motionless. The door clicked shut behind him. Major Daniel Carter Long, presumed dead, stood tall in the diner's center. His uniform crisp, medals gleaming, but his face told stories no one had written down. Some recognized the name, whispered it softly. Others gasped as realization hit. This was the man whose photo had sat behind Grace's register for years, a war hero, a ghost made real, walking toward the woman who never let go. Without hesitation, Grace collapsed into his arms, clinging like she could keep him grounded. Around them, silence cracked. Then, slowly, one by one, every customer, every worker, every passerby in uniform or not rose to their feet. Chairs scraped. Hands lifted. The entire diner stood to salute. Daniel held Grace with one arm, turning to face the room. His other hand returned every salute, not out of pride, but humility. He hadn't come back for applause. He'd come home for her. Veterans near the window stood with trembling hands. A young soldier in fatigues wiped his face and straightened his shoulders. Even the sheriff, who stopped by every morning, placed his hand over his heart. Grace stood beside him, tears streaking down her cheeks. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The air was thick with reverence. Daniel looked over the room and finally said two words, simple, but carrying the weight of years. "Thank you." It wasn't a ceremony. It was a homecoming. One clap, hesitant, respectful, then another. Soon, the diner erupted in a slow, emotional standing ovation, the kind reserved for true heroes. Phones discreetly captured the moment. Later, the video would go viral, the salute heard around the room. But in that moment, it wasn't about cameras. It was about Grace. Not just the woman, but the idea about remembering someone when the world forgets. Grace leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. The applause faded, but the emotion lingered. The old man by the jukebox wiped his eyes. The cook rang the bell for a new order, but stopped midway. No one was hungry anymore. They had all been fed something deeper, truth. Grace sat beside Daniel, hands trembling as she held his. Her tears hadn't stopped, but now they flowed quietly, not from sadness, but shock. "I thought you were gone," she whispered, barely meeting his eyes. Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze heavy. "I was. In every way that mattered." He told her nothing at first, his voice low, steady, hollowed by years of silence. The mission was classified. They'd been sent in with no exit plan. Ambushed. Separated. Injured. Captured. Grace's fingers tightened around his. "They told me you were missing. Presumed dead," she whispered. "That's what they told everyone," he said. "But I wasn't dead. I was held in a remote village for 2 years, no contact, no rescue, nothing." Her breath hitched. 2 years, she repeated. He looked down. "Then I escaped. Spent another year trying to find my way back. They didn't even believe who I was at first." Grace stared, stunned. Every wrinkle, every scar now told a story of survival. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly. "The thought of coming home, that's what kept me alive." From his coat pocket, Daniel pulled out a small velvet box, worn and faded like it had traveled miles. Inside was a metal Grace didn't recognize, silver and gold, engraved with his name and a date she hadn't seen before. They awarded it after I got back, he said softly. For what I endured. For not giving up. Grace reached out, fingertips brushing the metal surface. Why didn't you come home right away? Her voice trembled. I tried, Daniel said. But everything was different. I was different. Debriefings, evaluations. They didn't clear me for release until last month. His eyes met hers again. I was scared. That maybe you had moved on. Grace shook her head, tears spilling again. I never did. Not for 1 second. She picked up the metal and pressed it to her heart. Taking a deep breath, she finally spoke the truth she'd kept locked away, not to friends or strangers, but to the man she'd loved in silence. I never had a funeral, she said. Couldn't do it. Couldn't close that chapter. Daniel nodded solemnly. I saw your letters, he whispered. They gave them to me later. You never gave up on me. She smiled through tears. Everyone told me to move on, friends, neighbors, even my sister. But I kept working here just in case. Daniel reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. You waited for me, he said. You kept believing. Their hands stayed locked, years of silence collapsing between them. Neither had moved on. Neither wanted to. Outside, the crowd grew. Inside, time began to heal. Grace and Daniel stayed in that booth long after the rush faded. He told her things he'd never shared, the cold, the isolation, moments he thought he'd never see daylight again. They tried to break me, he said quietly. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw you. Grace's eyes welled again. I never stopped talking to you, she whispered. Even when you weren't here. Daniel smiled softly. You kept me alive, Gracie. More than doctors or training. He pulled out a faded letter, her last letter before the military declared him lost. He'd read it so many times the ink had faded. This, he said, was the voice that led me home. As they left the diner hand in hand, the crowd outside had grown. No cameras, no media, just neighbors, teachers, veterans, kids, all waiting to see if the story was true. Grace paused at the door, overwhelmed. Daniel squeezed her hand. They don't need to know every detail, he said gently. Just that I'm home. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some recognized him. Others just moved by the sight of Grace, the waitress they'd passed for years, now walking beside a man whose name would fill history books. How could the world forget someone like him? One man asked. The truth was, many heroes never make headlines, lost in files, buried in red tape. But today, the world stood up and remembered. Later that evening, a sleek black car pulled up. Out stepped a sharply dressed man, silver hair, stern expression. Major Carter? He asked. Daniel nodded cautiously. Director Langley, Department of Defense. Grace's breath caught. The man extended his hand. I owe you an apology. He explained how Daniel's file had been mishandled, misclassified, buried under layers of bureaucracy. Communication failures in the field listed him as a casualty. By the time he resurfaced, no one wanted to admit the error. Daniel remained quiet. The director's voice softened. You deserve more. You both did. He handed Daniel a sealed envelope, full reinstatement, formal apology, invitation to speak before Congress. Daniel looked at Grace and said simply, all I ever wanted is right here. The story made national news the next day. Veteran declared dead, returns after years, reunites with wife in small-town diner. Headlines praised his bravery, but hearts were captured by the video. Grace, wiping tears, standing tall beside him as the diner saluted. Grace never sought fame. Neither did Daniel. But the world needed a reminder. Some heroes come home quietly, and those who wait silently, faithfully, they're heroes too. Veteran groups sent letters. Flowers poured in. Grace's co-workers hung a photo near the registered. Daniel saluting her. Beneath it, a plaque reading, to the ones who waited. Weeks later, Daniel spoke at a local school. Never underestimate the quiet ones, he said. They carry the heaviest weight and never put down. Life didn't go back to normal. It became better. Daniel found work helping soldiers transition back to civilian life. Grace stayed at the diner, now co-owner, working fewer hours. The booth where they reunited became Hero's Corner. Strangers stopped by to meet the woman who never stopped believing. It's not just his story, Grace would say. It's ours. People called Daniel a hero, and he accepted that. But every time he pointed at Grace, he said, "She's the reason I'm standing here." Their love outlasted silence, time, even death itself. In the end, it wasn't medals or speeches that left the biggest mark. It was the quiet strength of a woman cleaning tables who never let go of hope, reminding the world what real courage looks like. So what do you think, folks? Who are the real heroes here? The ones on the battlefield, or the ones holding the line back home? Waiting, hoping, refusing to forget? Share your thoughts below. Let's talk about hope, loss, and what it truly means to stand by someone even when the world has moved on. Because stories like Grace and Daniel's, they deserve to be remembered.